Good
Right.
afternoon. This is Dyke Hendrickson, and I am the host of the podcast Life Along the Merrimack. We talk about the health and history of the Merrimack River. And frequently we have guests on. We had Senator DeZoglio several weeks ago. Other times we have color slides. And one reason for that is because I write books about the maritime area. My first book was Nautical Newbury Port. My second book was New England Coast Guard Stories. My third book was Merrimack, the Resilient River, that came out last May. And the book I'm working on now is Plum Island, a Vulnerable Gem. So we're going to talk about Plum Island today, again, in part because that's what I'm working on, but also it's an integral part of the Merrimack River system, the marsh system, and the whole North Shore. This is 96.3 FM Joppa Radio and local Channel 9 cable television. And since we have both listeners and watchers, I will, attempt to talk about the slides that are up on the screen. And I must say some of the slides really are remarkable. And I can say that because I did not take them. But here, our first slide shows Plum Island from an aircraft. And it shows to the left, you can see, the far left is one of the South Jetty. Then you see a green area, that is Reservation Terrace, which has been in the news recently because there's been a lot of erosion there. Then there's the buildup of Plum Island as we know it to be. And then in the second half of this slide, you can see a broad, many miles of beautiful sand beach. And of course, that's part of the Parker River Wildlife Refuge. So we're going to talk about some of the developments on the river and on Plum Island over the years. And what we're looking at now is a beautiful photo from summer, and you can see a great shot of Plum Island. Here is a more pedestrian view of Plum Island. This is the snack bar at the center in Newbury. I think if you've been down there, you probably recognize it. Many people go there. There's about parking for about 14 or 16 cars off to the right. It's a beautiful spot. A little frustrating, I think, if you're from out of town, because a lot of people, will go to park there in the summer, but we'll see the signs, no parking, and you have to be a full-time resident of Newbury in order to do that. And so, nevertheless, this is quite a famous view of a piece of Plum Island. Here is another aerial view of Plum Island, and really remarkable. This is in the winter. I think this is from about 2013. And you can see, the enormous amount of breakers coming in. This is the end of the island, of course, with the wildlife refuge. So there are no houses under duress that we can see. But in that period from 2013 to 2016, numerous houses from Annapolis Way and Fordham Way, some of them actually fell into the ocean. Others of them were ruined. So the ocean gives and it takes away. But I think this shows you the majesty of the North Shore. And it shows you how much wave action, can take place in a given period of time. Again, another shot of the southern part of Plum Island. That's the refuge. Clearly, this was taken from an aircraft. And I've got to figure out if I'm going to use this or not. I think it might be disconcerting to see the wing of the aircraft. You must know it's in an aircraft, although the popularity of drones these days might make someone think that any photo could be taken by a drone. But this is another shot showing the southern end of Plum Island, how beautiful it is, how much water has, accrued there at high tide, which this appears to be. And it's, a beautiful shot from aerial view. Going back over the years, Plum Island was a very fun place to be. And here's a series of postcards I have that show about 1890, 1900 in that area. People would come to the beach. The women would be quite well dressed. They have long dresses. They have hats on. The men have bowler hats and ties. And it was a fun thing to do, to come to Plum Island Beach. Of course, things weren't always good at Plum Island. Here's a wreck going on. This is an actual photo. It's from 1892, and it shows, a vessel under duress right off of Plum Island. The number of vessels and lives lost off of Plum Island is really remarkable. It's in hundreds, if not thousands. And, when we say thousands, that goes back to 1650 or so. But it was a very difficult harbor to get into. It was, a very difficult area to tack a vessel and to maneuver a vessel. This is before the age of steam, of course, but this is an example of a bad day at Plum Island. Because there were many accidents off of Plum Island, a group of lifesavers got together and created a technology that hopefully would save vessels. In this photo from about 1890, you can see 3 nautical types there standing in front of cannons, and these cannons would blow off, called Lyle guns, and they would send a big hook into the sky. And the idea was that hook would go out and hit the vessel, and so that the people, the sailors under duress, could tie the hook to the vessel and either have it brought in if there were enough folks on shore, or they could maybe slide down if it was in the better weather. And here, this photo shows a gun going off, and there is a vessel right out there, probably 100, 150 feet out. And so they're practicing getting their Lyle guns lined up so they could send hooks out to these vessels under duress. Here's a life-saving crew from Plum Island in about that period of time. And the jetties at Plum Island have always been a big part of the island. This, if you're listening, is a picture of the South Jetty. This was taken about 1895 or so. In 1831, the federal government actually put some money aside so there could be a breakwall. Okay, in 1883, the community got together and said, we need a South Jetty and we need a North Jetty. So this is a picture of the South Jetty. It was one of the first ones built. It took about 20 years, starting in about 1883. And it was supposed to improve navigation in the river. It also is a place where people could go for walks and also go fishing. This is the Plum Island Hotel in about 1910. It was, a gorgeous spot. It's down where the center is now, where the snack bar is that we just looked at. And it would, there wasn't a lot of traffic to Plum Island in, say, 1910, as we're discussing, in part because the road was not great. The bridge could frequently wash out. But people, one group of people did come to the Plum Island Hotel, and that was duck hunters. And they loved coming to Plum Island. There were plenty of ducks. There's also a lot of fishing. And frequently, they'd bring their ducks in and have them for dinner. But this is the old Plum Island Hotel, which burnt in about 1913. The ocean front of Plum Island, this is a postcard. Again, the men were in jackets and ties. The women were well dressed, and they have a couple umbrellas so they don't get too much sunlight. Here is showing one actual remarkable event to me is in about 1887, they started taking a horse and buggy with people out to Plum Island. And that was so popular. And they would leave downtown Newburyport, and families would get on these buggies, or sometimes horse-drawn barges, they were called. And then in about 10 years later, 1887, 1990, they built a train line out to Plum Island from downtown Newburyport. This is true. It doesn't seem to be true since so much of it's gone. But there was a theater out there. There were stores, as you can see. And here is a train coming in and out of Newburyport, went to Plum Island, and you could have a nice time there. Another means of transportation was the Carlotta. This was a steamship in about 1910, 1920. And it could start up in Haverhill or Amesbury or Salisbury and come down around the point, and it would go into the harbor inside of Plum Island. So the steamer Carlotta took a number of people with it. It was a wonderful day to spend some time. I would mention that the Newburyport never really got into the age of steam, at least in terms of building steam vessels. One reason was the harbor was very shallow, 12 to 14 feet draw to get in. And so if you built a steamship, they can be quite heavy, obviously, because they're iron and steel, it was hard to come in and out of the harbor. Also, that's what happened with the tall ships here, that the taller the ships got and the heavier they got, they could leave the harbor, floating out. But if they came back with tons of cargo, they could not get back into the harbor. So that's one reason Newburyport was the leading builder of tall ships in the 17th and 18th centuries here in the colonies. And Samuel Eliot Morison, the great American historian, actually said that there was no community more vital in building tall ships than the Newburyport area on the Merrimack River, including Salisbury, Amesbury, Haverhill. But here's a beautiful shot of the Carlotta in the old days. This is, we're looking at the Plum Island Pavilion. This is a postcard from about 1910. And you're looking at a lot of sand and a pavilion, which is built where the center is now. And to the right, you can see what looks like a bandstand. So people would take the train out to the island. They'd have a nice lunch on the beach, and then they'd come in the evening and have a dinner, or they'd bring a lunch, and they would dance and have a good time, and then they could be taken back by this horse-drawn, or in later years by the train. This is before most people had cars. I mean, this was probably before cars, period. But you can see that there are a lot of people there, and it was a good day at the ocean if you could get a ride down there. Here is a beautiful shot. Again, I'm doing a book called Plum Island, A Vulnerable Gem. And I've been fortunate to find many aerial photos such as this one. And this is a wonderful shot. It comes from the collection of Steve Atherton, who lives down on the island, and his avocation is he likes to take pictures. He likes to get into planes and take pictures of Plum Island. So, I really benefit from that. But isn't this a beautiful shot of the Reservation Terrace area of Plum Island? This is a scene well over a century ago, probably not 1890. And it's something that to some degree still works. We're looking at a fellow in a dory, and he's next to a very large accumulation of salt marsh. And of course, the salt marsh has grown there for centuries. It was used by farmers in 1650, 1750, and whatever. it's still used. You can still see the salt marsh getting cut in the fall. But here's an example. They had, because the tide would come in and out, they would have to aggregate the salt marsh, the salt hay, and put it up higher than the tide was coming in. I'm not sure he made it here, but this is a great photo. And you can see other stacks of salt hay in the background. Here's a lighthouse that has existed for many years. The lighthouse is very important for all sorts of vessels coming into Newbury Port Harbor. And this is what we're listening to is Life Along the Merrimack, which is on 96.3 Joppa Radio and local Channel 9 cable TV. And we talk about the health and history of the Merrimack River, and we also talk about Plum Island. Here's an example of Plum Island under duress. This was taken about 2016. And what we're looking at is many of the modern houses down at the island. This is near Annapolis Way. And, the tide is rising high. And by this time, a number of these houses had been really threatened. So people brought in, the homeowners brought in these large boulders, which you can see. And even with large boulders, this storm from the northeast is coming up high on the boulders and is probably giving the homeowners a bit of a scare. Now, since that period of time, boulders have been brought into most areas along the northern section of Plum Island. In the southern section, the way I define it, that's the Plum Island National Refuge. So you don't have boulders there, of course. But here you have houses who put up boulders, and here's a storm giving people a hard time. Again, you can see, and isn't this a glorious photo? What we're looking at is an aerial photo taken from a little south of the center. You can see the snack bar there. You can see a couple parking lots there. And also to the bottom here, you can see tons and tons of boulders. And so these boulders were put up, as I said, by the owners because they were just losing so much sand. And so their hope was that these boulders would keep the dunes and the sand intact. And to some degree, it has worked. I must say, since the South Jetty was put in about 2015 or 16, the change in the sand movement has been significant. In other words, people down at this end of the Plum Island have more sand than they did 10 years ago. That the Merrimack River sends much silt down. Now, because there's a new South Jetty, the silt does not escape. It goes all the way out to the end of the South and North Jetties, goes into the Atlantic, and is lately being pushed back onto the shores, which is good. Hundreds of homes were under duress, and the significant erosion was happening. But the South Jetty has helped many parts of Plum Island bring back more sand. Now, this has not worked for Reservation Terrace, which you can't quite see here, but Reservation Terrace suddenly in the past few years has been having significant erosion. And if you read local media, you'll see that a lot of the residents have gone to city council and said, we need some help in protecting us from the ocean. Here's a pretty spot on Plum Island. There's a pair of Birkenstocks or sandals in the foreground. It looks like someone took off their shoes and went out for a nice walk. But as we know, those of us who have been down there, this is a beautiful spot. And which is why, in my opinion, when people say, why do people keep building houses there? Why do they keep going out if there's so many storms and erosion and whatever? And I say, because it is so beautiful. Here's a nice shot of Annapolis Way, and here's some of the boulders that have gone in. To the right, you see a lot of sand. on the beach. You also see a backhoe or a plow or something. So that's all boulders as well. And that sand did wash away. But I must say, all in all, the boulders saved all of these houses. This is a pretty spot from the basin. That's the opposite side of the ocean down at Plum Island. And many people have homes here. Here's a shot again from the basin. They look towards Newburyport. They can see the church steeples. They can see some of the houses that have gone on along the way. But the basin side is a beautiful spot of Plum Island, as is the ocean side. This is, several years ago when the city was trying to help the people of Reservation Terrace. They came up with the idea of filling plastic bags with sand. And as you can see, it did not work very well. The ocean is very powerful. And what we're looking at, if you're listening, several score of plastic bags with sand in them. And at least half of them have broken and they floated out to sea. And I mean, it's embarrassing, but environmentally awful as well. I mean, we all try to do the best we can to keep plastic bottles out of the ocean, to keep refuse out of the ocean, and to think of these enormous bags were just breaking up and floating into the sea. It was very unfortunate. But to the right, you can see a house that I've taken numerous pictures of. It's very close to high tide. And, this is an area of Reservation Terrace that is under great duress. You can see again. Here's an example of 3 or 4 years ago when they were starting to bring in some of the big boulders. Now, the homeowners paid for that themselves, and they never got state permission to do so. But that having been said, it did save their houses. Here's a nice shot of Plum Island. Again, you can see it's 2013. You can see those groins. By groins, I mean aggregations of stone. There's 2 or 3 of them right along the sand. And this was in 2013 when a lot of sand had disappeared. It had eroded away. And in fact, if you look closely in the right, there's a house about center frame. It's owned by Dr. Hamani. I wouldn't mention his name, except he's very well known in town, 40 years here. And his house was about to teeter off, as you can see. This erosion in the 2013 was just incredible, but it doesn't exist anymore. Another wonderful aerial shot. These great aerial shots. Again, I didn't take them, so I can feel free to talk about them, but it certainly makes the area look very beautiful. Here are a couple more of the famous older homes, and they are protected by boulders, and they're doing pretty well these days. A wonderful shot of swallows at Reservation Terrace, and birds aggregate. And this is a shot I took when I was walking there this summer. There's plenty of greenery, and the houses are beautiful, and the swallows are having a good day. So it was a nice day to be at Plum Island. It can get breezy out of Plum Island. Here's a fellow walking along the water, and he is enjoying the time, but close enough that he can get back to the car, I'm thinking. Here's a nice shot of what we're looking at now, if you're listening, is a picture from the parking lot of the Parker River Wildlife Refuge. There's about half full, and, it's a beautiful spot. And in recent years, there's plenty of parking down there. This is the South Beach, a beautiful beach, the southern end, and it's owned by the state. This is at Parker River Wildlife Refuge. Actually, when I start these the next time, I should start here because we're almost out of time, except these upcoming images are just beautiful. This is at Hellcat as part of the Wildlife Refuge, and just a beautiful spot. Here's the beginning of the Wildlife Refuge, and one of the last large houses that was built on the island. Here's some yellow legs that have been just beautiful birds here that go to the island. The legs are yellow, if you care to see. And I thought this was a painting, but this is owned a photo by the Wildlife Refuge managers, but isn't that a beautiful shot? The refuge is run by the U.S. Department of Interior, Fish and Wildlife Service, as you can see by this graphic that is out at Plum Island. I just took a photo of these, and here's another simple photo, but it shows something we see in the summer. These areas are for wildlife, not for people, and so they close it off for the plovers each summer. Here's a beautiful bird that ibis that I'm gonna put that in my book, but isn't that a nice shot? Here's Joppa Flats, which is where the Audubon Society resides. And here is across the street, which makes it really a very convenient spot for visitors. Here is the headquarters of the Parker River Wildlife Refuge Center. Again, this is from Hellcat. This is an area of bird lovers. In the foreground, there's a Canada goose. And I took this photo. I shouldn't, it's a beautiful photo. It's not that the bird looks all that great, but every time I go down there, I take my camera and occasionally I come up with something. Here's one of my true heroes, Rachel Carson. She wrote Quiet Spring. She's considered to be one of the first environmentalists. She was here in Newburyport in 1947. Yes, she was. And she was an employee of the Fish and Game Service. And she was writing an article urging that, people to, make the Wildlife Refuge a permanent organization so people could always go there and not build there. And she was trying to save the black duck. Now, hunters were trying to get all this land back. They wanted to hunt. But Rachel Carson, who was a very, very brave woman, and I say that because when she was testifying about Silent Spring in 1962, she had cancer, and all these, scientists from DuPont and who make these pesticides were giving her a hard time, but she kept her courage up, and she said, look, save Plum Island. You can still do hunting in areas near it, but if you shoot every duck, if you scare every duck, you won't get anything. So have Plum Island as a safe homing ground and a resting area for black ducks and others, and everybody will be happy, the bird watchers and the bird hunters. Anyway, she was amazing. And here is a black duck, quite beautiful, don't you think? This is in flight, and they've made a big comeback. And again, black ducks. Aren't these photos terrific? I'm so glad that I stumbled upon people who can take good photos. Not that I'm not brilliant. I've published at least 1,000 photographs in newspapers and magazines in my day, but I'm not. This is just wonderful. So I think we're about the end of our moment. As I say, we're just getting into an area of birds and wildlife. So next week when we get together, I'm going to start with the birds and the wildlife. Maybe I'll just start with Rachel Carson because I didn't get finished talking about her. Really, she was an amazing person. So this is Life Along the Merrimack. My name is Dyke Hendrickson. We talk about the health and history of the Merrimack River. And thank you for being here. We're on 96.3 Joppa Radio. We're on local channel 9 cable TV. And we look forward to seeing you again. We're also on YouTube, so look us up. And all of these great half-hour shows are on YouTube. We'll see you again next week and have a happy Thanksgiving.